So, hello and welcome back to the MCC Brussels Podcast. I'm Jacob Reynolds, and this week joined by two special guests. First off, Javier Villamor from the European Conservative. Welcome.
Thank you so much for the invitation. A pleasure to be here.
We're delighted to have you. And joining us back to the podcast is our colleague, our research fellow, Richard Shank. Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Delighted. So before we set off, do make sure if you're watching and listening to us, make sure to hit the subscribe button. You can ring the notification bell, give us a like, even better, give us a comment. Tell us how you're finding the podcast. We've been enjoying your recent comments, especially on an issue we're going to touch later on Romania. But coming up on the podcast today, we're going to kick off with the question, has the EU finally become serious about getting control of our borders, migrations, deportations, and the rest? We're then going to take a look at the EU's brazen lie that the Digital Services Act is not a piece of censorship, something that I think we know our answer to, but we'll discuss nonetheless. And then, as I said, we're going to come back again to this very important topic of the massive democratic crisis, the ongoing constitutional coup in Romania. So first up, the European Commission announced plans for a new deportation system this week, where apparently they're finally going to get tough on deportations. They note that only 20% of people who should be deported actually end up getting deported, and they put forward a series of proposals which they claim will streamline the process, provide greater efficiency and transparency, but also, interestingly, they didn't miss an opportunity to say they're also going to make sure to safeguard the rights of those being deported, talking about giving them free legal assistance and such. But Javier, what did you make of their plans? Has the EU finally had a conversion to remigration, as it were?
Well, as you were saying, I don't think this is the final solution. If we go back to the 2023, when they started discussing the new plan for immigration and refugees, they said, I remember specifically from Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission president, when she visited Lampedusa. You remember the crisis they had quite after Giorgia Meloni came into power. And she went there. And she has this press conference next to Giorgia Meloni, and she said that they will try to find as much ways as possible to create or to transform massive illegal immigration into legal immigration. So if you go to the text, in nowhere you can find that they're trying to reduce the influx of immigration, trying to make illegal legal. So the numbers will be the same. And as for now, you're saying for this deportation project, I think is let's say, is an easy way, a tangent way to go out from a problem they have, which is actual immigration. The right is growing in the polls. The right-wing party is somehow winning everywhere. And they're trying to reduce this pressure on the European Commission accepting these kind of policies. But at the end of the day, we'll see that it could be the same as we had in 2015 with Turkey. We're going to pay tons of money in order to protect European borders from immigration. But this is somehow, we are blackmailing countries that at the same time are going to blackmail us in return. So money for immigrants doesn't work. We have tested this for 10 years and the numbers doesn't go down. There's no way to attack or to tackle these problems, but except trying to reduce the influx of immigration. What is the deportation project? You're saying, okay, let's create a third place or a third party country that we can send these immigrants. Let's pay to them, and until they ask for a legal way to come in. So you are not going directly to the problem, but you are giving the problem to a third party that will come in the future. Will try to blackmail you again with money. So this is a never-ending circle, right? We're paying to solve the problem, but the problem will give us another problem, and so on to the future.
Yeah, and Richard, I mean, in this, from what we've heard of it so far, it was kind of classic EU legalese. One point that I laughed during the press conference was when they said that they're going to introduce a new legal duty for potential deportees to comply with the process, which made me laugh because the reason they're being deported is because they've already not complied with a process that exists. So the idea that just saying you have to comply is going to solve the problem. But what did you make of their plans?
Well, something that is debatable in my eyes, but I understand the other political side as well, is how do we weigh humanitarian or economic needs of different kinds of people. This is an argument that I understand in the migration debate. Something that not only me, but most European people absolutely do not understand is how it can be that we have so many people who came either undocumented without any procedure and they are still here, or have been rejected after applying for asylum and they are still here. And this is, I think, the most controversial point of European migration policies, because if you ask in opinion polls for these groups of people, then 70-80% of the people in Europe would say, no, we need to do something about the better enforcement of deportations in Europe. So it is very, very hard to understand why the EU was so reluctant to act on this issue. And if you look on one of the press releases immediately after it was announced that the EU is going to act on this issue, a plethora of NGOs lashed out at the EU Commission that this time we were not asked. This was their first response. So obviously the question is, why were they asked previously? And the answer is yes, because the EU migration laws and regulations, and there's many of them. They basically still date back from 2005 to 2015. There was a hot phase in EU legislation in this era, and this mess that of migration crisis in Europe since 2015 is very much a result of EU legislation that the EU was active on in this field, and all these deportations were hindered by EU legislation a lot, actually. And why? Because if you look in the same NGOs' positions back then, how they influenced the EU legislation back then, they very much were in favor of, for example, of EU legislation that favored undocumented migrants, so that the state first had to prove your identity before you could deport you. I mean, imagine a similar procedure in taxation, that the state first has to identify you before you pay taxes. This is
it's a nice idea, by the way.
Yeah. So there were plenty of security issues with this as well.
Yeah, and that actually kind of gets to the heart of it, the kind of legal question, because it seems to me, Javier, that whilst the Commission might want to win a few brownie points with, as you say, right-wing parties who are a bit skeptical about migration, but there's no sense that they're going to get to grips with the fundamental legal framework that underpins, and even in some press releases actually from some of the right-wing populist parties that we've seen, very few people seem to want to grasp the really difficult question of how do you reform what are ultimately some international treaties, as well as a plethora of EU laws about what happens to people when they arrive in Europe that were built for a different era.
That's the thing. Also, that will be an obligation for state members. For example, you were saying now the asylum seekers. Also, 2023, the last terrorist attack here in Brussels was a guy that was 3 times rejected the asylum process, and it was in charge of Belgium itself. Now, for example, we have Spain, where you come from. They have passed a law to regularize 500,000 immigrants. Also, remember that when Meloni came into power, she was asked by the businessman, by the most important businessman from the country, to let in 1 million non-European immigrants. They specifically said 1 million non-European immigrants. So now we're saying that in Spain, for example, so the prime minister is asking from now on to have at least 250,000 immigrants every year, and they're proposing to change the national law, and that will affect the whole of the continent, where we're seeing somehow domino effects. For example, according to defense, Germany is talking about changing constitution that will affect the whole European Union. So as soon as 1 or 2 state nations change their, the laws to allow all this to happen, the rest will follow. And the problem here is that the more they will come, the more will come, the more they will come. The Spanish bank asked for 25 million immigrants in 25 years. 25 million in 25 years. That's 1 million per year. And that only come in if the actual laws allow that. There will be a problem. I don't think so. Because as soon as the Brussels Commission wants that to happen, what we're seeing, for example, Pedro Sanchez, even also some leftist countries are starting to talk about modifying the actual laws on immigration. Not only that, also defense investment. So we can see that the stand they have now will be different in the future.
Yeah.
So
and Richard, in fact, what actually needs to happen is more of the opposite. So I mentioned earlier the fact that, I mean, unless you're prepared to get to grips, for example, with the Refugee Convention, unless, for example, you're prepared to take a look at the European Convention on Human Rights, actual serious reform about migration, about asylum, about deportation is basically impossible.
It's a bit different if you're outside the EU or inside the EU. If you're inside the EU, then the ECHR doesn't matter really, because the EU laws that were stitched up between 2005 and 2015 are actually go way beyond the ECHR. So the very first task was to reform them. There was the Migration Pact passed in last year, and it took almost 9 years to pass this because the legal framework was so complicated, and then also because the political resistance was so fierce. And the Juncker Commission basically gave up halfway through reforming the migration laws. Then Ursula von der Leyen had to restart the entire thing from scratch, and she barely managed to get it through in her term, because all this, especially left political groups, and then alliance of these NGOs that I mentioned before, they try to block it as much as possible. But as Javier already said, even in the, for example, some social democrat governments began to realize that there are giant issues with the current framework. So there was already in the old European Parliament a change of mind.
One of the areas where the EU has tried to control certainly the debate about migration is with the Digital Services Act, and I wanted us to talk about that a bit today, because this was an incredible intervention where we have to recognize the context a little bit. Lots of American politicians, notably J.D. Vance, but others have started to really point their fingers at the Digital Services Act and say that something has to change, and the EU finally had their opportunity to kind of respond to this, and the EU Commissioner stood up in a press conference, and the line that I love was, this has got nothing to do with censorship. The DSA has got nothing to do with censorship. Richard, do you agree?
If you look through the DSA, actually most of the DSA is a large piece of legislation, so it touches on different areas. But certainly there are parts that can be misused. Misused to crack down on free speech, for sure. And actually we know this from the EU Commission's stated intentions, that one of their objections is to use this the Digital Services Act to also tackle issues like hate speech or foreign interference in national elections. And the big thing is, it's okay, you can do this, but does the Digital Services Act have some enough safeguards in itself to prevent abuse? And here the question so far is, we don't know, because so we only know that for example, in Romania there are some investigations under the Digital Services Act because of foreign interference, but we don't know anything more about them. So maybe they are minor, maybe they are significant. So transparency would help a lot already to so that we can see from the outside, is this really a transparent procedure? Are they cracking down, or are they just doing minor regulatory stuff? We don't know yet, but from the stated intentions and communications, we have to be aware of the potential misuse.
Yeah, well, Javier, to me, it sounds like my colleague and our friend Richard is talking about the possibility of safeguards. I think that's far too kind of you on the DSA. What's your take?
When we talk about the Digital Services Act, we must have in mind that it's also supported with the Media Freedom Act. So both goes in hand. Me as a journalist, I'm personally affected by these laws in the way that they say, okay, the Media Freedom Act is to support the work of the journalists, to have a safe space for them, not to be forced to do anything they know, to have transparency on the companies, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, we see that it's also to try to censor what we say, hate speech, disinformation, which also applies for the digital platforms. And if we play the David Apple case here somehow, we understand that, Europe is becoming, whether we like it or not, a superstate. And also the world is getting more complex, and there are a lot of dangerous content in the internet. That's true. We have, for example, porn, easily access to children. We have drugs. We have also radicalism, jihad, which is funny that you cannot say, you cannot talk about the LGBT lobby because that's hate speech. But you go to Facebook and you can find be haters, killers.
It was kind of Islamic kind of
Islamic propaganda. So that's quite funny, right? But from that side, I understand it. But at the end, what I understand is that the EU is trying to protect itself not from foreign interference. That's what they say, but to prevent us European citizens to see what is all the rest in the world, what is happening. When the Ukraine war started, I cannot watch any more Russian media. I'm not saying that Russian media is not propaganda. Of course, it's propaganda, but I want to watch that propaganda in order to, even to criticize it. But why I'm not able to see that? Why I'm not able to have different opinions? Why I'm not able to even to think or to see other media from all around the world? So somehow the EU is protecting or trying to protect the power they have in order not to allow the citizens to think themselves what is happening. Because as we have X, for example, is a perfect tool for journalists and for every kind of citizen to see instantly what is happening around the world like this. And what we see is that they're trying to protect themselves from that. Even they're saying, hey, what you saw is not true. I'm going to tell you what you can see. And I understand that some companies, at least from the Americans one, of course, they get advantage of our market. That's the technology. They could that. They were able to do that before us. But at the same time, you're establishing all these laws, all this framework. You are not letting EU companies to innovate, and that's a problem. That's also from the EA Act.
To come back to some previous EU legislation, in 2019 they issued a new copyright directive in digital cinema. Right? So copyright doesn't sound like crackdown on free speech, but actually the EU made copyright laws so strict that it's way easier for platforms and any kind to strike down content. And they, throughout the entire process, they said, oh, this is going to lead to more diversity of opinions. We just want to increase the possibilities of free speech. So only good things about it. But now, 5 years after it came into effect, scientific studies already have proven that the diversity of opinion and content online decreased, and it's very much linked to the increased ability of platforms to strike down content created often by small independent creators. And so actually it made it even empowered often big US-led corporations to be they increased their power to the detriment of small European content creators. So it had a complete opposite effect. And the EU has not a good track record regarding digital legislation so far.
Well, the two trends 100% reinforce each other, because you've got, on one hand, the European Union and all of these worries about disinformation, hate speech come up. They always bubble up at particular moments of populist discontent around Trump, around Brexit, around the rise of populist parties in Europe. And then you see the EU start to talk about this again and again, which means you then have more legislation. And then the only companies in a position to better comply with the increased legislation are usually larger companies, because they can invest in AI flagging tools and all the rest of it. So these two, and thankfully we have X, which is slightly more of a free speech oriented platform, although it has its own problems too. But you can tell there's kind of an interest among some of these larger companies that they benefit from the increased regulation.
Don't forget also that when they passed the Digital Services Act, the idea was to create an independent body, supposed to be independent body, where the customers and the companies can go to solve the problems they have. For example, you as a customer see some content you don't like. You go to this independent body, you suit them, or you say, hey, look at this, illegal content, whatever. And then they go to the company and ask the company to delay it, to erase it. And if the company doesn't allow that, they could be fined. It could be fine even if I don't forget, if I'm not wrong, about to 20% of the income of the year. Was a crazy amount of money. So that's a lot of money for a fine. And also that allows motivate people to become internet police.
Mm-hmm.
And thank God now we have the X that kind of freedom, not like before. But don't forget also what we saw when Donald Trump came into power. Suddenly, for example, Michael Zuckerberg and other digital platforms owners somehow indirectly they said that they were censoring in
Yeah, they were forced to admit it. Yeah.
So they didn't say that, but when they said we are not going to do this anymore, you are saying that you were doing that before, right? As I said before, there are two approaches. I understand the main idea, which is always nice, but again, who is going to control the controller?
Mm-hmm.
And who is going to form this independent body, the supposed to be independent body?
Well, on that, Richard, we know, and this is very much, as I say, a part of the work that's going on across lots of kind of places at the moment to expose the role of NGOs. But we know that the way they do it expressly is they invite different NGO groups in to act as the fact checkers and to police the code of conduct. And it's always they're not independent bodies at all. In fact, they're all staffed with, and they often are involved in writing parts of the Digital Services Act.
Yeah, this is a part of a bit bigger problem because around the EU there are thousands of so-called expert groups, steering committees, and whatever they're called. There's actually an own database on them, and this is maybe one of the most intransparent parts of the entire EU. How this system works. This is because we know that these bodies exist who are aiding the EU with implementing laws, also the Digital Services Act, but it's very, very hard to access what they are actually doing.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Digital Services Act actually enhances, multiplies this already existing problem by 100-fold. So it's and it's very, very transparent. If remember Alice Weidel's conversation with Elon Musk in January, we heard that 160 people were involved. Well, I think these 160 people were not actual commission officials, but most likely this kind of people who were fact checkers, and they were supposed to strike down the thing. What came out of this? Because the actual talk was quite boring. So who paid for this?
Now, I'm when it comes to the speeches and the proclamations of EU figures, I'm very, very cynical. But even I have been amazed at the total silence, and in the case of the pro-EU media, the complete distortion of reality around what's happened in Romania. They've now, the Supreme Court's officially denied the application of Georgescu to run as a presidential candidate. I can't remember something in recent times, Javier, maybe you can correct me, that's been quite so brazenly anti-democratic as this.
Well, some people are saying now, probably more as a joke than reality, that Brussels has canceled more elections than Moscow, right? But in this way, I think the problem now is that they don't care. So a few years ago, if we understand there is a script, a political international script, some people call it conspiracy. A few years before, they were better scriptwriters, like in Hollywood, they spend time doing this. But now it's like they know they control everything and they don't care. And somehow they are protecting themselves. If you go to the Constitutional Court, most of them are People's Party and Socialist members. So no surprise on that. The problem is, as you said, that creating this fake narrative that, okay, I can understand as a journalist that, of course, if there is an ingerence, or external influence, okay, but trying to destroy the whole system of a country just because a guy you don't like has won the first round of an election, probably he wouldn't even be nominated as president, because in the second round, he will never be able to win, also as Marine Le Pen in France. So why are you doing this? Why are you risking all what you have just to cut down a candidate to go into election? So I don't understand. The problem of this is that you are demonstrating probably a fate you didn't want to sow before.
Yeah. And Richard, one of the things that I know is a huge interest to us and to you personally as well, but is the worry that, lots of people might be tempted to not take this so seriously. Romania is not, people might have stories to tell over the years about corruption in Romania and political corruption, etc. But the worry is, isn't it, that if they can do this in Romania and get away with it, which country will be next?
Well, first to come back to Javier, because I slightly disagree a bit, but I don't think they are proud of their achievements in Romania. The silence is due to the fact that it's so damn embarrassing what happened there, because their fix to this Russian interference in the Romanian elections caused way more problems than any Russian interference ever could have caused. So now you have a completely we have constitutional courts decisions that are lacking procedures, lacking evidence. That are throwing out millions of votes. Also for the left liberal candidates, you have this continuously shifting claims against Georgescu. One time he didn't disclose campaign finances. Next time he's barred because he's an extremist. So it's a complete mess. The Romanian elite's response to this crisis was that of headless chickens trotting around. And alone this thing that we are here in Brussels took notice of it, and we are speaking about it, is already super embarrassing for the EU. So this is one of the main reasons why they are not talking about it. And which country next? And this is the big question, because this backfires so badly that not only did Georgescu not went away with the went away into the political abyss, but as we see, his camp is going to nominate another candidate. No, it has even repercussions on the EU level, because now everybody else thinks who is going to be next. And this we have in May presidential elections in Poland, obviously also a country that is next to Russia. So are there going to be investigations into this election as well? In autumn we have Czechia, which is where the supposedly pro-Russian camp is now leading in the polls as well. Then we have next year in spring Hungary, which is always under the allegation of being pro-Russia. So this we can go on with every election in Europe, and really this is destabilizing European democracy way more than any Russian TikTok attack, TikTok campaign could ever have done.
On this, I understand there are some candidates there, of course, could be more pro-Russian, but in general, they're calling pro-Russian those who are anti-establishment. So it's a way to protect themselves before they can do something. About what happened is, your question about if this can happen in the future. Remember what the former Commissioner Breton says, the 9th of January, the French TV broadcast. He admitted that they interfere in Romanian elections and that they could do it anytime. And for example, he said the example of Germany. Yeah. So I guess that imagine AfD would have won. Probably they would have done the same. But also in the European Conservative, we cover the first meeting of the Democracy Shield Commission. And they invited two NGOs. One is not independent because totally close to the French government. And the other one was Romanian, quite independent. And both of them, specifically the Romanians, said there is no evidence of political interference from Russia. What we could see is that there was an unexpected engagement in the candidate in TikTok's profile.
Yeah.
So, and very smart from a question from a Rassemblement National MEP. She said, okay, so if you're saying that he won because of a TikTok account, if we, for example, say that Libération supports Macron and Macron wins, do we have to cancel French elections because the Liberation newspaper was supporting the candidate?
Yeah.
So no answer for that.
And it's also a refusal to accept that sometimes unexpected things happen in an election. And so the whole case against Georgescu and TikTok rests on the fact that it was unexpected. And their only explanation for it being unexpected is that Russia is...
The other question is, aren't we doing the same? Because in 2023, the Commission asked Google to interfere in their algorithm to help the counter-government from Belarus. We interfere in Georgia. We interfere in Macedonia. We interfere in Ukraine. So the problem of this is not the interference itself, the narrative.
Yeah.
So you cannot blame others while you're doing the same. That's the worst part for me from Brussels.
And Richard, and to end on, but maybe the slight positive is the way that this is, I agree, is very actually worrying the way that this is going to, I think, damage trust in democratic institutions right across Europe. But the slight silver lining, as we've been talking about, is the way in which this has united populists and kind of patriotic people right across. Right across Europe. I know you've been kind of digging into this a bit, but it's funny.
Yeah, so Georgescu has quite some wild positions that are not accepted across even in the right-wing political spectrum all across the board. And obviously he's a Romanian nationalist. So, and one thing that is striking, at least in the online sphere, that Hungarian nationalists who have a historical dispute with Romanian nationalists, we don't go into this, but suddenly I saw X accounts cooperating with each other that would never have done this previously. And also, to be honest, I was surprised that even from the left side, there were some critical voices. Don't forget, the left liberal candidate was also thrown under the bus because she was anti-establishment. She wanted to do something against corruption, and she was thrown conveniently enough also under the bus by this entire procedure. And so some German independent MEP was also speaking up in favor of an investigation, or some other figures who you really wouldn't have suspected. And even in mainstream German media, for example, often enough, these articles that went a bit more into the depth of things began with, okay, Georgescu is a right-wing nationalist, but the procedure itself is highly doubtful in the end of the article. So I think this will backfire terribly. And don't forget, this is also still international affairs stuff. So we will see some reaction by the Trump administration on this. I'm pretty sure. So this was a terrible mistake by the Romanian establishment parties. It was just so stupid.
This anti-democratic force has managed to unite Hungarian and Romanian nationalists, which on many issues probably never would have happened, but shows you the degree of kind of danger in this as well, and how interesting this is. But we'll be following this closely. Thanks so much for joining us on the MCC Brussels podcast. Remember to hit like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. But now, Javier, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
And Richard, a pleasure as always.
Yeah.
We'll see you again soon.